you're recording. There you go.
Okay. Yeah. So revocation of election. Last week we talked about revocation of election, dude. I mean, I imagine like there's a big movement in Congress right now with MTG. She left Congress and she said that she didn't want to. She was causing kind of a protest movement. She was telling everyone to revolt, like a tax revolt, and because of all the fraud, waste, and these dirty, rotten scoundrel people that have just been taking money and stealing it and taking the tax money and in the billions and maybe trillions, maybe it's so much money that we have no idea what's going on. So, they're talking about a tax revolt. We talked about actually the way that I did mine, which was a revocation of election process last week. That was under Title 26. That's 60. I think it's 6108 G. Is it G? And it talks about revocation of election in there and the actual procedure to use. Now there are some forms that I talked about last time, but they're really not exactly proper, I don't think. So I just made up my own one-page form and sent it in, and it worked. And they ended up. Now I think there was two separate things that happened. One was I had a small tax debt that I did a dispute on. Now I filed and paid all my taxes. I thought I was current, but there was apparently an old tax from like 2019, about it was about 6 or 7 thousand. I was like, wait a second, I paid this, so I disputed it. I did a 15 USC 692G tax dispute, and then that kind of went back and forth for a while, and they said, well, we're looking into it. And then when I did the revocation of election, they sent me back a letter saying that I was an uncollectible status. So I think it was two separate reasons. The revocation of election was one because it kind of changed over, which we talked about the volunteering into the tax system, and then twofold was when I did the dispute, and the dispute was then. I don't really know if it's proper. I don't think it really was. I'm not sure if it's. I don't really know if it's. I don't really think it's a consumer dispute, to be honest. But that's what I used, and anyways, I either way, it put me into an uncollectible status. So the 15 USC 692G dispute, I really don't think is proper, but it doesn't look like it's a consumer debt to me. But yeah, revocation of election is proper. So none of this is legal advice. This is just we're going to talk about just kind of a private contract organization here today. And if you see this on a recording, get some advice from somebody who's licensed and has the qualifications to talk about any of this stuff. So we'll open up in a little bit, but before I go to any of that, I want to talk about some of the other things we spoke about. First was we talked about status. I think was it the first week I talked about status? I don't remember. I didn't really go deep into it. I just kind of did background on the branches of government, the three branches of government, and how the Constitution was set up, and the founders, how it was really put together to where you could begin to understand how to move the court. Because when you're looking at our system, you got the people at home plate, and then you got the legislature at first base. That's the Congress and the state legislatures. They're at first base. That's all the laws and the statutes underneath the Constitution. So the Constitution authorizes the legislature and the Congress to make these laws and statutes. So the laws are considered to be constitutional until a court says they are not under a 1060 action, declaratory relief action. At second base is going to be the judicial branch. That's where we go to move the court with the laws on the first base. Okay, we get to go to the second base, the people do, to move the court, to then get a writ and get that writ of execution from the executive branch to enforce our rights, whether it's restoring our property or it's getting our property back from somebody, or telling someone to stop doing something that we don't want them to do. That's going to be the third base executive side. Once the writ gets issued by the judicial branch, that writ is so powerful. The writ is I haven't talked about writs yet, but I need to do like a full thing on writs, because the writs are like the great, and this is like a preview of what we can talk about in the future, but writs are like from the king, and the great writ is called Warranto. There's really, it comes in the nature of Mandamus, and Mandamus means like make them perform, make them do something. And then the quo wanto is show you what authority do you have to do what you're doing. And that could go against any corporation or any office. It's the great writ, and it actually requires what's called leave to sue from the attorney general of the state of California in this case to even pursue the writ because it's so powerful. You need leave to sue first, and I haven't seen a way around that. So that's the great writ. But otherwise, there's prohibition and the mandamus. Usually, the writ itself is it's going to be an equitable action, and you're not asking for anything but performance. And you need, in order to do a writ, you have to actually have a statute that requires a mandatory duty, a shell. They must do this. A shell says that you have to do this, and if they don't do it, then the writ goes in, and then it usually will issue if it's done right. But oftentimes they'll turn it into a complaint and turn into litigation when it really is just a petition, and it shouldn't take long. It shouldn't go into motion practice and demurs. I know that some people like Catherine's had that happen where it goes into demurs and motion practice and takes way too long for a simple writ. But that happens at times, so they'll confuse the issue. So, but yeah, today I wanted to talk. There's a couple previews about things we could talk about as well, which is citizens arrest. Like, this is such a major, one of the most powerful things you can learn. And considering that we have a actual government that is legitimate, then citizens arrest is an effective tool. Now, if you have a completely rogue government, like in Minnesota, where they're doing fraud, millions and billions in fraud, and telling the people to stand down, the police officers, then it's not going to probably work because you have no accountability out there by the police. They're gone. They're rogue. So, but in considering that you're not in that environment of total, complete corruption, then citizens arrest works. It's a very, very strong procedure, and it works in California under 837 of the Penal Code. I want to talk about that. I'll kind of break you guys down the elements on that, really, like in this show, so we could understand it in detail. And then that also accord and satisfaction is the other one. We talked before about discharge, like discharging debt, like sure, all debt. I mean, there's a lot of theories on this discharge procedure that haven't worked. But one of the things that has worked on discharge is accord and satisfaction, because it's just the law. It is the way the Uniform Commercial Code works and has it set up. And accord and satisfaction is a settlement procedure where you're basically, what happens is if you have a dispute with another party, it normally arises from an insurance claim. But if you have a dispute with another party, what you would do is you would send them a letter in advance letting them know what you're going to do. That's under 1572 of the Civil Code. And you're letting them know in advance what you're going to do. I'm going to send you an offer to compromise, which is going to be an accord. If you accept that offer on the check as a payment in full for this amount, then please cash it and keep it, don't send it back within 90 days. After the 90-day period, it's going to cure. And you basically accepted my agreement, my offer to compromise. And so then after that, after the 90-day period, it is completely satisfied, accord and satisfaction. And then they should satisfy the obligation at that point. And if they don't, well, that's going to have to be judicial relief, like a 1060 action. So I know someone who's going through that right now, and I need to share that once the complaint he files his complaint. I want to share how he's doing it. So it's pretty cool. The other one is citizenship, state citizenship versus federal citizen. This is a really important topic we talked about briefly in like the first few weeks, where, there are court cases to back this up. Of course, the slaughterhouse decisions right after the 14th Amendment was passed. And then Wong Kim Ark was the one in 1890 that established that the state citizen and the federal citizen basically were two different ones. And it established the old English common law coming forward over the people for the very first time. And that old English common law, in the dissenting opinion under Justice Harlan, that was feudal law. When you hear feudal law, it's pretty unusual, but that's the old law where the serfs are on the manor picking weeds in the middle of the of grass, and they're just voluntary slaves. They're voluntary slaves out there on the manor, and they're under the king or the queen's jurisdiction. And they could volunteer out of that system if they knew how, but they don't know how because they think they're free. And so that's what the old serf was back in the day in England, in the old English common law. So he would sit there on the manor. He's picking his weeds. He's living in a life of almost poverty. He's barely surviving. He's just paycheck to paycheck. And he thinks he's free. He thinks he's actually free, a free person. And then so when they come around, and the old movie, there's a funny movie that was out there about this back in the day. anyways, they make a comedy out of it because the serfs are there and they think they're free and they're like, boisterous and telling others to leave and like the soldiers to get out of there, like they have some rights. And they laugh, the soldiers like laughing at them because they're just slaves, but they don't know it. And that's ultimately what happened under Wong Kim Ark, which is insane. I mean, we always wondered kind of like, if you ever wondered like why would, from my experience when I went into the court and I thought I had one of the traffic tickets in 2018 I thought I had these rights and I thought I was going to win the case, constitutional law. Oh, I read the Constitution, I read the government code. This is amazing. I have all these rights. This is great. I read the Declaration of Independence. I thought I'm going to read this out to the judge and he's going to just respect me and treat me like a king. This is going to be great. The cop didn't show up and I won the case anyways, but it was because he didn't show up. But I would have lost had he shown up, because I had no idea what I was doing. And I thought, and so it wasn't until the next year that I went in again. And I tried the same procedure and I got just absolutely destroyed because the court had no respect. They treated me like garbage. They treated me like a serf. They treated me like a serf. And I just was so baffled as to how they were getting away with that. How are they treating me so bad? Why would they treat me so low? Like, what did I do to them? And it took me a while to kind of figure it out, but it wasn't until much later that I figured out it was this Wong Kim Ark case, that it's right in the dissenting opinion. It explains that it brought forward the old English common law, the feudal law, over the U.S. citizen. So when we established that the difference between the federal citizen and the state citizen, as shown in the slaughterhouse cases, has all the rights. They have the rights of the whitey. They call them whitey. State citizen is the national now. They call it national under the Immigration and Nationality Act. Same thing as a state citizen. So that person has all the rights. They're not the federal. Now they could be both the federal and the state citizen. You are both, but they always consider us the federal citizen everywhere we go. So unless we go through give them proper notice, and they actually have a way to give notice on that. And I a lot of people have done it. I think it works. I mean, I believe it works 100%. It's been effective. I haven't noticed any sort of like major, game changing difference, in my life because of it. So I'm not saying that it's going to change your life. It may change your attitude a little bit, maybe feel more free, but yeah. So that's another thing to talk about. But I want to go through. Let's see. I'd like to get how to write a complaint summary. I mean, one of the things that I've noted in here is summary judgment. I know that, if you get into litigation, once you start to kind of go and learn about litigation and judicial process and everything, the ultimate, like the atomic bomb in the courtroom, the ultimate thing of all time is called motion for summary judgment. So once you master summary judgment, then you would be considered you basically have the ultimate power. Forget the bar, forget the test, forget all that other crap. None of it matters. None of it compares. It's not even on par. Nothing. Motion for summary judgment, victory in the court. Boom. You were the man. You've done it. You've mastered everything at that point, because that is the ultimate. You win on the papers without going to court. And ultimately, a lot of the courts like Sacramento, Los Angeles, and some of these bigger counties, what they're doing now is you just move the court and you don't even go. Now, they weaponize that against the people because the people don't know that. And then so the attorneys, they got a big law firm and they got 15 paralegals and they're using these motion for summary judgment procedures, and they win, they don't go to court and you lose. That's why they've done it, because they can kick your ass with motion for summary judgment. So as opposed to complaining about it, we can really learn how they do that. How does a summary judgment work? And it comes down to a case called FPI versus Nakashima. It's the 1993 decision, Court of Appeals in California, that FPI versus Nakashima that talks about what the standards are in summary judgment and the standards of pleadings, like how pleadings work in a complaint and an answer. And you could actually face summary judgment just by not answering the complaint properly. You get sued and you just answer and you think that you're fine the way you write it. You just put denied, general denial. You could face summary judgment on that. You could. According to Nakashima, FBI, actually it's Wolf versus West Valley, which is cited in, which is after Nakashima. But that's another case that really goes into it in detail. Wolf versus West Valley, 1998. Now, okay, so I just want to kind of preview on a couple of those topics, but this is I think the most pressing one is the citizen's arrest. So maybe I can do a quick little brief here on citizen's arrest for you guys. Let's talk a little bit about it. And we'll go through a story. I know, Thomas, I know you had citizen's arrest before. I'll tell you kind of my experience. Like I'd say 3 times I've been involved, and 3 or 4 times I've been involved in citizen's arrest, maybe more, maybe 4 times. So here's the way it works: is that under the original laws under the Old English Common Law, the old law from England, they had a system where they allowed the people to take the law into their own hands and basically cause an arrest on someone else. Now in California, we've established it under 837. So if you go to 837 of the Penal Code, it says a private person may arrest another only when a public offense, misdemeanor, is committed or attempted in the person's presence. Public offense includes any misdemeanor or felony. The person arrested has in fact committed a felony, and even if it's not in the arrester's presence. So the law, a felony has in fact been committed, and the arrestor has a reasonable cause to believe a person has committed it. So in this case, you have the power here. Let me give you the story of how I've used it before. So a friend of mine calls me up, and she was being harassed by her neighbor, and I'm like, well, call the police. And I happen to be like really close by. So I'm like, okay, I'll just go by there. So it's like, sure, I'll go by there. It was more of a domestic thing, like with 2 women. So I was like, oh, this is silly. I thought this is not a big deal. So I went down there and I thought, okay, what's going on? The next door neighbor's on this other lady's property, yelling hostile profanities, racist slurs at her, and completely rogue, out of control. And I go to the lady, I said, ma'am, would you please leave over here, please leave this property. You're threatening her, you're threatening her private space over here. If you want to yell and scream, I guess do it on your side of the property, but not over here. And then she says, no, I'm not leaving. I'm doing everything. I'm in charge of neighborhood watch here, and we are watching this neighborhood, and she believes she had all these rights and she could be on the property. So anyways, I said, well, please leave, or I'm gonna have to arrest you. So, and she says, oh, you're not gonna arrest me. You can't arrest me. You don't know what you're doing. So I said, all right. Well, I asked one more time, and then she didn't leave. And then so I said, okay, I'm gonna have to place you under arrest. Now, when you place an arrest, the way it works is you gotta call 911 and get it on the record. So you got to do it on the record. Hey, I'm placing Jane Doe here under citizen's arrest under 837 of the Penal Code, and the reason being, and this is going to be also required in the statute, you have to tell them the reason. It's on your authority. So it's 837, which is citizen's arrest, and then what is the cause? The cause of the arrest has to be given, and that's, I think it's 847. Yeah, 847 says a private person's arrest without unnecessary delay must be taken before a magistrate or peace officer. And then 841 says upon making the arrest, the person making the arrest must inform the other person of the intent to arrest, the cause of arrest, and if acting as a peace officer, the authority to make the arrest. So a private person has to tell them the authority, and then has to give them the cause of the arrest. So in this case, she's on the property, and I say, listen, I have the authority to I'm on the 911 call, and I say, I'm here I'm arresting Jane Doe here under citizen's arrest. I'm placing her under arrest right now. She's under arrest under 837 of the Penal Code for citizen's arrest, which I have the right to do under that statute. And then she is under arrest for trespass and potential battery of the next door neighbor here. which is a misdemeanor, potential misdemeanor crime, that's going to be 841, where she's, causing battery and trespass of this other person, or at least threatening battery. So we've got Penal Code 841 is letting her know exactly what the cause is. And they say, okay, we're going to come down here. I'll say, all right, well, I said, I have to tell the person, I said, you are under arrest. You are detained right now. You are not free to go. You are detained. I'm detaining you. So you stay right here. So in this case, that you have to, that person is required under the law to wait, and be detained. Just like any situation. I mean, if a person flees and they become a fugitive and they start running from the law and they get in their car and they go on a high-speed chase, it happens. Rodney King happens all the time. It does happen. But under the law, that person was detained. They got to stay right there and sit down on the concrete and the curb and wait for the cops to come, and then they can deal with the situation. So that is exactly what happened. And they said the cops show up and they talk to the person, and they talk to me, and they talk to that person, they talk to the lady, and they get the whole story, and they gather what happened. Now at that point, it's really, you sign off a waiver with the cop, and he's basically taking complete immunity for making the arrest. So either it's on the record and he's got it on his body cam, or maybe a form. And two other times I've seen it happen is a form is used by the local municipality. They have a form, and it says citizens arrest form, giving the cop complete immunity. I have the forms. They're very, very, basically what it says is that John Doe arrested Jane Doe, and all the officers in the county and the city, anyone involved, have complete immunity. They had nothing to do with this at all. It was between two parties. So therefore, the cops, they have no liability. They can't get sued for this because they're not supposed to be arresting people without a warrant or probable cause. Anyway, so they're not out there just trying to arrest people and get sued, so they don't want that to happen. So in this case here, the cop gets total immunity. He takes the person into custody and then brings them before a magistrate. That's what the statute says. You got to go right to the magistrate, or at least to the cop, and then the cop's got to bring him to a magistrate shortly thereafter. That's the cop's job. Unless I'm bringing him directly into the place, which is not recommended. I would never want to do that. I'm dealing with the person through 911. The cops are showing up, and then they would bring him to the magistrate themselves because they're going to go in the back of the cop car. Now, this is probably the most empowering procedure you could have on your side, because if you have this, think about it. You always have your cell phone at all times. I mean, who doesn't have a cell phone nowadays? You have a cell phone, and you got 911. As soon as the incident happens, I go on the record and I have 911. Now I'm making a record. Having that record is gold. A 911 call is a record. That gets subpoenaed. It's used in court and evidence. And now, we know exactly what happened. It's not up for dispute as to what happened, as who did what, because it's all on the record, on the recording right there. And you follow this. I follow this procedure properly. And then they show up, and if it's a serious enough crime, I want to take them to custody. Maybe in some cases I say, you know what, the person they've already repaired themselves. They're better. They've apologized. They're never going to do it again. And I say, you know what, I'm going to move on, and I'm not going to press charges on this one. So I don't need you to take them into custody. And that's happened to me before too. You got to be a forgiving person, where somebody's willing to repair. They made a mistake. They were upset, and they've moved on. They'll never do it again. They learned their lesson. Then there's no reason to go through the legal system and waste all this time and effort if they're not a true danger. They're repaired. So, and that happened to me too. And that really should always be my position is always be willing to forgive people who are willing to change. So, but at times they're not willing to change, and they got to go in there and face the magistrate, and then I have to go down there and deal with them in court that way. And that's what the law says. So it's if it's a felony. Now, another cool story. If you guys remember back in the day, it was 1996. Now, in 1996, there were still videotapes in the courtroom. And so they would have these video cameras inside the courtroom for most hearings. I guess it was most hearings, or I don't know if it was all hearings or most, but either way, the old VHS recording tapes would come in. And in the family court down there in Stockton, there was a lot of corruption going on at this time. Nothing's probably changed, but there's this guy. He was a pro se guy, and he was getting sued back and forth over family court over custody of his kids, and I think he was. I don't know where he was at the time in the case, but either way, he'd been litigating with him for a few years to try to get custody of his kids, and so he goes into court, and it's all being recorded, and then the district attorney he places under arrest for a federal crime, yeah, which he articulates very well in the courtroom. And this video had gone absolutely viral, mega viral, and it was called "I Arrested the District Attorney." And a lot of people kind of got familiar with this procedure because of that. Now, in this case, if you go back and watch the video with Michael Alexander, he actually, the district attorney was under arrest and he was detained. Now, he wasn't in custody yet. He was just under arrest. He wasn't in custody. So there's two separate things. In custody is different than arrest. So he was under arrest, and if you watch the video, he's actually putting his keys up, giving his wallet to his wife or his assistant there, and he's basically ready to go into custody right in the courtroom. And then the judge stops it and says, "No, we're not taking you into custody right now inside the proceedings." But that went mega viral, and actually that's how I met Michael Alexander, is because of that that video. And he actually really was the one that I'd say explained citizens arrest procedure to me. She taught it to me really, really well in detail, in how he was able to execute it properly in court, and inside a courtroom on video. But again, it's the authority under 837. It's the grounds for the arrest have to be given, and then they've got to go into a magistrate. And so if anyone's, if you listen to this, you really learn this procedure. I'd say it's more empowering than being trained in self-defense. Well, self-defense is equally important, I'd say. Okay, it's equally important, but at the same time, you can get yourself in trouble if you don't have a self-control with self-defense, and you end up hurting someone. And so, you've got to be mindful. If you're trained in martial arts, then you could be classified as carrying a weapon just by having self-defense procedures. So we've got to be kind of careful on those things. With this is just following the law. Now we're just following the law. We're not hurting anyone. We're not stepping on anyone's rights. We're not doing anything wrong. We're just following the law and procedure. That way, it's the way the statutes and legislature work, because they want law and order in society. Well, that's how our society is set up. We don't want people, using hand-to-hand combat on each other in the street. It's just not ideal. And especially not weapons. I mean that's even worse. Of course, I understand carrying the Second Amendment and enforcing it is key. I support that. And in fact, the whole open carry right now looks like it may open up in California. It's all under wraps. That's something we may want to talk about because it's really interesting. I know that there's been some rumors that the CHP is no longer enforcing open carry, at least very, very soon, in California. But it hasn't officially been that court case, the Bonta case, hasn't officially been settled yet. It's not officially settled yet. So it's not 100% done. But it looks like they might have to open up open carry, and if so, that'd be great for us. We'd be able to open carry without having to pay. Oh, speaking of that, I don't know if you guys ever looked into this, but I looked into CCW, $2,000 for the CCW, or the overall cost. It's going to cost me 6 months plus. It's still a maybe if I'm even going to get the CCW. So that is an outrage. I was thinking I'll pay $50. I was like, I'll pay $50 for a CCW. I would do it, and I would go through the process. $2,000. That's an outrage. That is a racket. That is wrong. That needs to be repealed. That makes it unaffordable for people to do that. So anyways, that's why we have this procedure 837, where we don't have to go through a CCW. We don't have to go through all these other procedures and getting ourselves in trouble when we just have the empowerment of the law behind us. Citizens arrest. 837, dude. So let's okay, that's let's wrap it there. We'll open up with any comments and questions. And I saw I got a text from Lisa today saying she wasn't feeling well, but hopefully she gets better. And I want to open up and just do like an open forum today, Thomas, so we can just not necessarily go one person to another. Just literally just open up and we'll let it run and go from there. Sound good?
Sounds great.